The year is 1996. The date, February 8th. You wake up, grab a cup of coffee, and head to your computer to search on Yahoo for a new web host. But something is different. The standard gray background is pitch black. The text is bold white. And there, on the front page, is an ominous description. It says Yahoo has turned its pages black for 48 hours in support of the Coalition to Stop Net Censorship. President Clinton signed legislation that includes a provision which limits freedom of expression on the internet. With this act, the very same materials which are legally available today in bookstores and libraries could be illegal if posted on worldwide websites or Usenet groups. Today is the day the internet went dark, and the internet's future as a free and open platform hangs in the balance. The bill that got everybody riled up was called the Telecommunications Act. Specifically, they had an issue with Title V, which was referred to as the Communications Decency Act. It sought to criminalize the posting of quote-unquote indecent material on the internet. On the surface, it was meant to protect children from stumbling across pornography, but individuals and organizations like the Electronic Frontier Foundation warned that the vague language of the bill would lead to censorship of risque literature and art, as well as things as mundane as medical information. If this act stood, they suggested, it would have a chilling effect on the growth of the web. But the webmasters who were busy building the web weren't just going to roll over and take it. They banded together and agreed to present their web pages with a black background to coincide with President Clinton's signing of the bill. And it wasn't just a bunch of small fringe sites that chose to participate. The big boys like Yahoo, Netscape, PC Magazine, Webcrawler, the Software Publishers Association, and even Senator Patrick Leahy all came out to play. Unlike broadcast networks, the internet wasn't a network for the people, it was a network by the people, and they weren't going to let anyone tell them what they could and couldn't put on it. Enter Shabbir Safdar, co-founder of Voters Telecommunications Watch.
Back in the early 90s, I was living in New York, and I and a collaborator named Stephen Cherry and a gentleman named Alexis Rosen, who runs one of the oldest internet providers in New York City, wanted to allow people to have a say in the way that laws and regulation and policy were starting to come up and be made around the internet. It was looking to be a really big problem, and it seemed like people in Washington who were making this policy didn't necessarily know anything about the internet, and we were concerned. And we thought, if we can just let people know what is being proposed and what is being discussed, and we can spread the word wide enough, we could actually do a service so that when people had an opinion about, hey, that's a bad idea, or I'm opposed to that, we could also give them a place where they could vent in the traditional American democratic way, which often involves screaming or complaining, but is in fact how the process works.
Along with his friend Jonas Seiger, a fellow online advocate, Safdar attempted to mount a strong opposition to the CDA long before it was even passed.
Senator Exxon from Nebraska proposed a way to regulate the internet that would have been more like TV, in which the whole internet would have had to adhere to like a community standard of the most conservative community in the U.S. And apart from that not being workable, as we know from the fact that there's no country borders online, it was just a bad idea. It would have really suppressed a lot of free speech. And so we assembled a coalition to oppose it with my longtime, at that point, who became my longtime collaborator, Jonas Seiger, who was at the Electronic Frontier Foundation and then went to the Center for Democracy and Technology, and the actual Electronic Frontier Foundation, the ACLU, EPIC, and many others. A lot of people working on the free speech issue. And the bill actually was called S314, so we had a coalition called Stop 314. And we worked hard as the bill went through Congress, and unfortunately it got attached to the Telecommunications Reform Bill, which the entire telecom industry was lobbying hard for passage. And once that happened, we kind of knew we were going to lose the battle in Congress and have to fight it in the courts.
Safdar, Seeger, and their colleague Danny Weitzner noticed that the media was leading with the pornography angle and needed to find a strong image to counter the controversy.
Every time someone did a story on the bill and the proposal, it was not about free speech versus censorship. It was about a picture of Pamela Anderson with censorship bars over her breasts. And that was casting our cause in a bad light, because we're not talking about pornography, but the broader question of free speech. And Danny and Jonah said, we need another visual that the media can run. We need to make this issue not pornography, but the broader question of the strong First Amendment in America. And so they said, what if we made a visual? What if everybody turned their web pages black for a short period of time to make this strong visual that everybody using the internet would see that this is what you are putting at risk? And it was a good idea, and they called me and pitched me on the idea, and I thought it was a great idea, and we went to the broader coalition and then eventually through the mailing lists of that coalition out to the whole internet and said, everybody for this period of time on this day, turn the background of your website black, and we gave them the HTML code to do it.
While it was a simple protest confined to the relatively small online community, the major media outlets couldn't ignore the thousands of web pages going dark, and the protest got major coverage on CNN and in publications like Time Magazine, The New York Times, and of course Wired Magazine. Thousands of voices, even online voices, are hard to ignore, but somehow President Clinton did, and the Communications Decency Act stood as written. Naturally, Safdar was disheartened, but he was still confident that he could make a difference. On the eve of the bill's signing, he spoke to Wired Magazine and said,
"We figured if we did this for 5 years and made a difference in just one vote, that would be all I'd need to confirm my faith in the fact that democracy is actually working. Because if you can't win, you can at least be a big pain in the ass. And we are among the worst pains in the ass we know."
And as luck would have it, the checks and balances built into America's government actually pulled one off for the people. On June 12, 1996, an appeals court judge in Philadelphia declared the act unconstitutional, and a couple of weeks later the Supreme Court agreed with that decision and invalidated the act.
In the years following the passage of the legislation, there were a series of court challenges to the different provisions of the act, and they all succeeded where we hoped they would succeed. And a lot of those are brought by the ACLU, and then the initial one was brought by a coalition of a lot of different groups, not just the ACLU. And every time the court struck down one of the provisions that we had a problem with, I felt like it was a victory. And it was really satisfying. We fought a really good fight, but we're ultimately lost when we lost in Congress, and the president signed the bill, but then we won in court. The number of websites that went black was very impressive. It was a big deal at the time. People were making money online, so I think we did it at the only moment that it could be done in history, and it was very satisfying. And all the people that participated in that, many of them went on to join the court fight. Jonah and Danny Weitzner and the folks at CDT put together an empowerment coalition of citizens who could sign on to this organization that was a signatory to the lawsuit, the first lawsuit in the Supreme Court. So all these people that turned the web black then turned around, and many of them signed on to the actual lawsuit and were plaintiffs. And could say, I was a plaintiff in this great historic case that overturned one of the worst censorship laws ever to get passed in the U.S. and in digital history, at least.
If the Communications Decency Act had lived, the web would be a very different place. Sites like Wikipedia, the Gutenberg Archive, or possibly even Google probably couldn't exist as they do today. Sure, you wouldn't have to worry about accidentally stumbling across pornography, but a few graphic pop-up ads are a small price to pay to ensure the artistic, cultural, and informational services that the web offers aren't watered down. While the Great Web Blackout didn't directly stop the law it was protesting, it brought awareness to the issue. The internet was at a turning point, and the actions of those webmasters helped save it from the same government regulation that stagnated radio and television in the name of protecting the children. And believe it or not, this protest is still inspiring similar protests on the web to this day. Recently, the Australian government announced plans to censor the internet for all of its citizens. The citizens responded with a protest they called the Great Australian Internet Blackout, in which protesters turned their social networking profile pictures black to show their support. The organizers claimed that over 500,000 people participated. Now, there's a lot of cynical criticism of slacktivism on the internet today. In 1996, less than 1% of the world's population was online. Today it's closer to 30%. A lot more voices to sift through. Could a protest like the Paint the Web Black campaign work today?
I don't think that particular tactic is effective, but I think there's no doubt that when you look at almost every month, there is some effective demonstration of the digital communications technology having a factor. I mean, I never thought that when we were doing things like Turn the Web Black, or we were sending out emails to ask people to call their member of Congress, I knew we were doing something new, but I had no idea that someday it would topple dictators, and that simply the news online would be enough to spark protests in nearby countries, as what's going on now in the Middle East. That was far beyond even what I could dream. Everything is a funnel. Right? People start out at the top of the marketing funnel, even in advocacy, with small actions. Maybe you share a status update from a nonprofit group, or maybe you tweet or retweet something from a cause that's happening. And the more you act and the more you get involved, the closer you get to the bottom of the funnel when you're actually finding yourself standing in front of a courthouse holding a sign, or giving money, or soliciting your friends and neighbors. It's all part of the process of ramping you up as an activist. And just because it's a small baby step, and because it doesn't require you to leave your chair, doesn't mean it's not an important part of your growth within that movement.
If the day the internet went dark tells us anything, it's that if an online protest is loud enough, it stands at least a chance of breaking through all the online noise and getting some real-world attention. And with all the new ways the government is trying to lock down the internet, it's more important than ever that as citizens of the World Wide Web we stand together, united, against those who would turn the internet black